Good afternoon everyone, my name is Anin Azmi and I am one of the trainees from the LCOP Internet Volunteer Virtual Training Program. And in this series of 5 hands-on video, I'm going to share with you what we've learned during that program, which is particularly about coding and building some interesting STEM projects, all powered by this little guy here, which is called a Codewiz sensorboard, and also the Coding School 3 platform, which is available online for free. But before we begin, let's go over the 3 main goals that we are going to aim for at the end of our learning. So over the next 5 videos, first of all, we are going to understand what a Codewiz sensorboard is and what you can do by going around the sensorboard. Secondly, we are also going to analyze various code blocks and write out simple script using the Coding School 3 program by putting them together and activating our Codewiz sensorboard with it. And finally, 3, we are going to synthesize what we have already known about Codewiz and the Coding School 3 platform by building 3 different STEM projects using Codewiz and School Coding 3. But before we begin, if you're getting the impression that I am a person that seems to be well versed with this topic, with coding and building STEM projects, let me assure you, you're very wrong. Let me introduce myself. My name is Anin Azmi and I am an English teacher with a Bachelor in Teaching English as a Second Language. I took science stream in secondary school, which involves the main focus of physics, chemistry and biology. I do not have exposure of programming both in college, high school and also where I work. Okay, on top of that, I am also, how do I put this, really bad at craftsmanship. So what happened was I nearly cut off this finger back in secondary school with an electric saw. I almost cut off this, I can't remember which finger, with a paring knife a few years back, and just a few months back I fell off a ladder trying to drill a hole. That's the actual footage right there. So it is very safe to say, or unsafe to say, that I have zero prior knowledge when it comes to coding and programming, and I am very bad at craftsman work. But what I like in programming prior knowledge and craftsman finesse, I make up in teaching and linguistic persuasion. So in this 5 series video, I am going to show you, or I'm going to share with you, how I taught myself to be able to code in just 5 days. So if it works for me, I hope it works for you. So let's begin. Okay, in Malaysia, we have this saying, tak kenal maka tak cinta. This basically means if you don't know something, it's very hard for you to learn how to love it. So let's begin by knowing our sensorboard in today's lecture. Title card. So to understand what a sensorboard is, first we have to understand these 5 senses, which is sight, smell, sound, touch and taste. So for example, let's say if I have a cup of hot coffee or kettle, a boiling kettle. So if my hand touches that kettle, the receptors in my hand is going to sense the heat coming from that kettle, and very quickly all the receptors on my skin is going to send a quick signal on my brain, and then just like that my brain says, that's hot, pull your hand away from that kettle and, I don't know, scream. So in computing terms, a sensorboard kind of works the same way, but there's a different terms to it. In comparison to what we experience in sensorboard computing terms, for example, just now the heat from the kettle is what we call an input, and the bit about our brain processing how to react to it is called coding, and the final decision to react, which is like pull away my hand from the kettle, is called an output. So you have to understand these 3 things, which is input, code, output. Unfortunately, a sensorboard isn't able to, sense everything around it just like we do. So we do it almost instantly, but for a sensorboard, it basically can't do any of that at all, or at least not by itself. So the job for a programmer or a coder is to basically teach this sensorboard with scripts in order to tell it how to, feel or sense changes in its environment. And of course, that's the exact objective of our video today, which is I am going to teach you how to teach your sensorboard how to feel things. Now that you know what a sensorboard is, let's get to know our Codewiz sensor board. So there's a lot of different brands for a sensor board. You might have heard of Microbit, Arduino, or if you have not yet heard anything, well, today we're going to talk about Codewiz, definitely, and this is going to be our focus for today. So let's start with the personification of our Codewiz sensor board. Unfortunately, I cannot remove this thing. I did not know why I didn't remove this before the start of the video, but it's okay. I'm going to show you, well, maybe like you can look here, or you can look at the main screen here, which is like the main diagram. So I think it's easier for us to, well, have it labeled that way. So anyways, if you can see my Codewiz, built on the Codewiz is first something which is called a microphone, which is over here. So a microphone is something similar to our ear, where it can detect sound. Of course, it cannot detect every particular sound variation, but it can detect the loudness of it. And then on the other side of the microphone, which is this tiny dot over here, is called a light sensor. A light sensor senses light. So this holes is actually a sensor by itself, and it senses touch. So if I put my finger over here, the sensor board is able to realize that one of the holes is being covered. At the front here as well, there's these two buttons. You can hear that. So these two buttons senses touch in form of hard presses. And then we also have a tiny bit of sensor here. I'm not sure if you can see it. I think you should be able to. This is a distance sensor, which it detects distance. So especially like if you have a sensor board and you have something around it, for example my camera, it should be able to detect how close that camera is to it. And finally, well, I don't think any sensor board actually have any capacity to detect the sense of smell, but what it lacks in the smell sensor, it makes up in this little guy here, which is the gyro sensor. So the gyro sensor detects whether when you put your sensor board down, it can detect whether it's like tilting sideways or it's a little bit too high above the ground. And in computing terms, this is what we call an X, Y, and Z axis. Xi. Now that you know what a sensor board is, or the sensors on a sensor board, let's look at the other more prominent thing. You might be surprised why I'm not pointing about like this big screen here. So the first thing you might notice from a sensor board is this big OLED or OLED panel, and this is how a sensor board is able to give you a form of output visual wise. If we turn it around at the back, this black box here is a buzzer, and it allows the sensor board to give output in terms of a beeping sound. And then at the front, you can see that we also have these 5 tiny LED here called NeoPixel LEDs, and these things allows the sensor board to give output in the form of colorful lights. So basically we have everything about our sensor board, and right now we have all our inputs and we have our outputs. What about making this work? So this sensor board is not operational right now. That's because we have not yet supplied it with any power. We can do so first by this port over here, which is a USB cable port, a micro USB cable port. And then over the other side we have a battery power supply thing. Basically, I'm not sure what this port is called, but basically we plug batteries in it. Anyways, at the back there is 2 more ports, one over the top and one in the center, labeled as SCON and MCON. So these 2 connection port allows us to add additional sensors to the sensor board. So you might realize that I give an example of temperature just now, but none of these sensor boards detect temperature. Well, I'm going to show you that in the third video, so we can add more sensors to it. So there you have it, a quick course on understanding all the sensors and the port of our Codewiz. In the next video, I'm going to show you how we can connect our Codewiz to a computer running the Coding School 3 program, so we can start teaching our Codewiz to use all its sensors and of course give us the output we want. So until then, I hope you enjoyed this video. There is a link in the description if you need to review back everything I taught you about our sensor board. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.